Have you ever sat quietly and wondered when everything started to change between you and your children? Not in a dramatic, movie-worthy way, but in those small, silent shifts. The phone calls that come less often, the conversations that start to feel rushed, the way they listen but not really hear, and how, in subtle ways, you begin to doubt if your presence is more of a convenience than a comfort. There's a certain ache that comes with aging, not in the bones, but in the heart. It's not just about getting older. It's about feeling like you've become someone else in the eyes of the people you once held through sickness, through heartbreak, through growing pains and teenage silence. It's like your story, so full of love, sacrifice, and years, has been quietly rewritten. And now, too often, you find yourself saying, "I'm sorry," for simply existing in a way that once would have been seen as strength. There's no shame in having apologized for things. That's how many of us were raised: politeness, selflessness, humility. We were taught that love is compromise, that peace is found through giving in. But what happens when those apologies start carving pieces out of you? When "I'm sorry" becomes a reflex, not a reflection. I want to talk to you today, just you and me, about the things you're still apologizing for, even now, after everything you've lived through, and how, quietly, gently, you can begin to put those apologies down and step back into your dignity, not with anger, not with rebellion, but with truth, with love for yourself. Let me start with something I heard recently from a woman named Helen. She's 67, lives in a quiet neighborhood, and has 3 grown children. She told me how she always used to apologize for repeating herself. "I'm sorry. I know I already said that." She'd laugh nervously, even though no one was really listening the first time. And I asked her, "Why are you apologizing for wanting to be heard?" She looked at me for a long time, then whispered, "Because I don't think they want to hear me." That struck something deep. Because maybe you've felt it too. That feeling like your words carry less weight now. That your thoughts are taken as outdated. Your advice is unnecessary. And so, you preface everything with, "I know this might sound silly, but," or "sorry. I just wanted to say," but here's the truth. You've earned the right to speak without shrinking. You've lived through decades of storms, losses, love, heartbreak, healing. Your words carry wisdom that doesn't need permission to exist. They don't need to be filtered through someone else's attention span or mood. They belong in the room simply because you do. Helen, like many of us, wasn't really apologizing for her words. She was apologizing for taking up space, for wanting to feel relevant, for hoping that someone might look her in the eyes and say, "Tell me again. I want to hear it." But let me tell you now, your voice still matters, and you do not need to apologize for needing to be heard. Another story I carry with me is about Frank. He's 72, and every Sunday, he bakes muffins for his neighbors, especially the young couple next door. For years, he'd drop them off, smile, and say, "Just thought you might like something sweet." The couple would say thank you, sometimes, but most times, they'd just nod and close the door. One day, Frank told me, "I feel silly. Maybe I'm bothering them. I should stop." I asked, "Why do you think showing kindness is something to be embarrassed about?" He paused and said, "Because they don't seem to care, and I don't want to be a burden." That word again, burden. How many times have you swallowed your needs, your gifts, your very presence, out of fear that someone might find it inconvenient? Frank wasn't wrong to question his actions, but what he didn't realize was that his kindness didn't need validation. His muffins, warm and thoughtful, weren't just about baking. They were his way of saying, "I'm still here. I still have something to give." And there is nothing shameful in that. You don't need to apologize for caring more than others seem to notice. You don't need to feel foolish for showing up with open hands, even if the world has become closed off. Somewhere along the way, we started believing that aging means fading, that we're supposed to dim ourselves quietly, gracefully. But why? Grace isn't silence. Grace isn't invisibility. Grace is knowing your worth and moving through life with dignity, not apology. I don't know what you've been apologizing for lately. Maybe it's for calling your children too often. Maybe it's for asking the same question twice. Maybe it's for forgetting something small, or needing help with your phone, or saying something that didn't land the way you meant it to. But I want to say something to you. from one soul to another. You don't have to apologize for still needing connection. You don't have to apologize for not being perfect. You don't have to apologize for existing in a world that's become too fast, too distracted, too easily annoyed by the gentleness of age. You're not a mistake to be corrected. You're not an interruption. You're a living archive of stories, of lessons, of quiet courage. Maybe you've said, "I'm sorry," 1,000 times before. But maybe, starting now, you don't have to anymore, not for simply being who you are. Because underneath all of it, beneath the apologies, the carefulness, the silence is someone who still has a voice, a beautiful, steady voice that doesn't need to shout to be heard. And maybe it's time, finally, to stop whispering your worth. There's something deeply woven into many of us, like an old habit stitched into our bones, this need to make everyone else comfortable first. Even now, long after raising families, holding jobs, smoothing over arguments, and sacrificing sleep, we still find ourselves reaching for the words, "I'm sorry," before we even know what for. It becomes a kind of background music to life, doesn't it? Apologizing for the noise your body makes, for the way you take up space, for forgetting, for remembering too much, for asking twice, for laughing too loudly or grieving too quietly. You begin to believe that your presence should come with a disclaimer. Don't worry, I won't ask for much, but you were never meant to live like that. Margaret, a retired nurse in her late 60s, told me about how often she apologizes for saying no to her daughter. Her daughter, Chloe, often drops off her 2 boys every weekend so she can get errands done. And for a long time, Margaret said yes, even when her knees ached, even when she was exhausted, even when she just wanted to sit by the window with a book and a cup of tea. The first time she said no, she told me, her voice trembled. She hung up the phone and cried, not because she didn't want to help, but because she felt guilty for choosing herself. "I felt selfish," she said, "like I was failing some invisible test. But saying no doesn't mean you're unkind. It means you're human. It means you're honoring your body, your time, your energy. You spent decades putting others first now. In this season of your life, maybe you can learn to honor yourself without guilt. And still, that old voice creeps in, doesn't it? The one that says, don't make waves, don't disappoint anyone. But disappointment is not the same as disrespect. And you, my friend, are allowed to say no without an apology attached to it. When Margaret learned to say no calmly, clearly, and with love, something shifted. At first, Chloe was distant, but in time, something beautiful happened. She started calling just to talk, not to ask. The relationship began to breathe again, not because Margaret tried harder, but because she stopped trying to be everything. That's what self-respect does. It opens up space. It doesn't demand or explain. It simply stands. There's another man I think about often, Ethan, 74, soft-spoken, once a high school history teacher. He used to apologize for forgetting names or mixing up stories. He'd laugh nervously and say, "Sorry, I'm getting old," as though aging were some sort of personal failure. But why do we treat forgetting where we put our glasses as a crime? When we've remembered lifetimes of love, loss, and wisdom, Ethan told me, "I think I'm just scared. They'll think I'm losing it." There it is, the fear beneath the apology. That one misstep, one stutter, one lost detail means we're slipping away, that we'll be seen as fragile, broken, irrelevant. But aging isn't unraveling. It's evolving. The mind may shift, yes, but the soul deepens. You might forget a name, but you still remember how to hold someone's hand in silence when they're hurting. You may misplace your keys, but you know how to find the right words when someone needs comfort. You are not an inconvenience. You are not a problem to solve. And you don't need to apologize for the way life naturally moves through you. Even now, you might feel the urge to justify your needs. Maybe you ask for help carrying groceries, lifting a suitcase, figuring out your phone, and you feel embarrassed, as though needing something makes you weak. But needing support isn't weakness, it's connection. And there is quiet power in allowing others to show up for you. Not because you owe them an apology, but because you deserve kindness. Do you see the pattern? We've spent so long trying to be small enough to stay loved, quiet enough to be acceptable, helpful enough to be welcome. And somewhere in that shrinking, We lost sight of just how worthy we are exactly as we are. I want you to imagine, just for a moment, what it might feel like to stop apologizing for simply being real. To sit at the table and speak your truth, not as a lecture. Not to win, but because your story matters. To answer the phone and say, "I can't today," without explaining. To let silence exist in conversations, without rushing to fill it with justifications or nervous laughter. To walk into a room and believe you belong there, without conditions. Respect doesn't begin when someone else finally acknowledges your worth. It begins when you do, when you stop negotiating for dignity and instead carry it with quiet certainty. There's a woman I met recently, Grace, Stabinti, with silver hair and a spine like a mountain. She told me how she used to apologize every time she talked about her late husband. "I know I bring him up a lot," she'd say, looking down. "I'm sorry, I just still miss him." But why do we apologize for our grief? Grief is not a flaw. It's not something to hide in your pocket when company comes over. It's love with nowhere to go. And speaking someone's name is a way of keeping them near, not for attention, not for sympathy, but for reverence. Grace told me one day she decided to stop saying sorry. She still speaks his name. She still remembers out loud. But now she says, "I talk about him because he mattered." And that simple shift, so gentle, so grounded, changed everything. That's the power of unapologetic presence. It's not loud. It's not angry. It's simply real. So if you're still apologizing for needing space, or remembering someone you lost, or wanting more time to rest, or feeling tired after a long day, let me say this to you now. With all the warmth in my heart, you are allowed to live without shrinking. You are allowed to set gentle boundaries. You are allowed to exist in fullness, not fragments. And when you begin to make these quiet shifts, not out of rebellion, but out of love for yourself, others will notice. They may not say it out loud, they may even resist at first, but they will feel it. The steadiness, the self-trust, the unspoken, beautiful message that says, "I know who I am, and I do not need to apologize for being me." There's something extraordinary that happens when you stop trying to earn your place in people's lives and simply begin to stand in your own. The shift is almost invisible at first, so small, so quiet. It might even feel like nothing's changed, but it has. It begins inside you, in the way you walk into a room and no longer scan for approval, in the way you pause before saying yes and allow yourself to consider, "Do I really want to?" In the way you stop apologizing for not being who others expect and start embracing the person you actually are. It's not dramatic. It's not flashy, but it's powerful. Helen, the woman I told you about earlier, the one who used to apologize for repeating herself. She recently told me something beautiful. Her middle son, Ryan, visited for coffee. She caught herself about to say, "Sorry, I know I already told you this story." But instead, she smiled. She kept going. And you know what he said? "I don't mind, Mom. I like hearing your stories." That moment didn't come because she begged for attention. It came because something in her shifted. She wasn't trying to prove her worth. She was simply sitting in it, and in that stillness, her son noticed, not because he was corrected, but because something in her presence had changed. That's the magic of living without apology. People feel it. They sense that you're no longer waiting for their validation to exhale, that you are standing firmly in your own light. And that kind of presence invites a different kind of respect. When you stop chasing acknowledgement, you create room for it to find you. And sometimes, the biggest change doesn't come from others. It comes from the way you treat yourself. Like Jack, a soft-hearted man in his early 70s, who once told me he felt embarrassed whenever he talked about the art class he'd started attending. "I know it's silly," he'd say, "just old folks painting sunflowers and bowls of fruit. But why is joy something we feel the need to justify?" Jack grew up in a time when men were told to work, to be useful, to stay serious. Fun was for the young, for the free. So now, when he finds himself smiling while painting with trembling hands, a voice in his head still says, "Don't make too much of this. It doesn't count." But it does count. Joy counts. Play counts. Your laughter still matters. You do not have to apologize for finding joy, especially when the world around you tries to convince you that you've outgrown it. Jack told me he kept going to that art class. He started bringing his own brushes, his own favorite shades of paint. And one day, the instructor asked if they could frame one of his pieces in the hallway. Jack said yes. He didn't say, "It's not that good," or "Are you sure?" He simply said yes. That is what restoration looks like. Not a return to the past, but a reclaiming of joy, dignity, and self-worth in the now. There's a quiet beauty in the way others begin to respond to us, when we're no longer asking them to define us. Children start calling, not because we demanded respect, but because we've stopped chasing it. Friends linger longer in conversation, not because we fill every silence, but because we're no longer afraid of being misunderstood. Our relationships shift, not because we force them, but because the air around us becomes steadier, clearer. Sophie Shakistioit told me about a moment that changed her. Her daughter had just dropped off her laundry at Sophie's house, something that had become a habit. No thank you, no warmth, just expectation. Sophie used to wash and fold it without complaint, then apologize if she was late delivering it back. But one afternoon, something inside her said, "No more." She looked at the bag of laundry. Then she picked up her knitting instead. When her daughter called 2 days later, asking where it was, Sophie said gently, "I didn't feel up to it this time. I need to spend my energy on things that feed me." There was silence on the other end of the line. And then, slowly, a shift, the next visit. Her daughter came with coffee. She folded her own laundry in the kitchen while they talked. It wasn't dramatic. No apologies. No arguments. Just respect, slowly returning to the room. That's what happens when you begin to live the change. The world doesn't always respond instantly, but your presence becomes a mirror. And eventually, the people in your life will see themselves more clearly through it. You don't need to announce your boundaries with fire. You only need to stand by them with love. You don't need to chase attention. You only need to be so rooted in your own truth that others are drawn towards you. And you don't need to apologize for becoming more of who you are, not less. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you looked at yourself, really looked, and said, "I'm proud of who I've become"? Not for your accomplishments, not for your roles, mother, father, grandparent, friend, but for your soul, for your gentleness, for your ability to keep showing up in a world that sometimes forgets how to say thank you. There is a steadiness in you now that wasn't always there, a wisdom shaped by both joy and sorrow. You've learned that being right is less important than being kind, that peace doesn't come from being agreeable, it comes from being true. You don't need to be loud to be heard. You only need to stand firmly in your light. So if today you still catch yourself apologizing for resting, for laughing, for crying, for needing, for dreaming, pause, breathe, and remember who you are beneath the layers of explanation. You are not someone waiting to matter. You already do. You don't need to earn rest. You don't need to justify joy. You don't need to apologize for how long it's taken you to come home to yourself. Because this moment, this quiet knowing, this gentle strength is the gift of now, and it's yours to keep. If you've made it this far with me, I want to say something very simple and very true. Thank you. Thank you for staying. Thank you for sitting with these words, for letting them move through you like a slow river, softening old doubts, loosening hidden shame, and maybe even lifting a little weight you've been carrying alone for far too long. It's not always easy to face these quiet habits of apology. They sneak into our days so gently. We don't even notice how often we're offering ourselves up for permission, for approval, for grace that we already deserve. But something tells me that deep in your heart, you've always known this truth. Your worth does not need explaining. Your love does not need shrinking. Your life, your long, rich, beautifully imperfect life is not something to be apologized for. It's something to be honored. And maybe, just maybe, today marked the beginning of that. You don't have to change everything at once. You don't need to walk into tomorrow and demand a revolution. Sometimes the most powerful changes begin in silence, in the soft refusal to keep shrinking, in the quiet decision to start listening to your own voice again. Maybe the next time someone asks something of you, you'll take a moment. You'll check in with your own body, your own needs. Maybe you'll say yes. Maybe you'll say no. But you won't apologize for either. Maybe you'll tell a story, one you've told 100 times, and instead of bracing for boredom or brushing it off, you'll say it like it matters, because it does, because you do. Maybe you'll laugh too loudly at something that brings you joy, and you won't cover your mouth in embarrassment. Maybe you'll cry over a memory you thought had long since faded, and you won't rush to explain it away. Maybe you'll finally allow yourself to be enough, because you are, you always have been. And I want you to know, you're not alone in this. There's a whole community of people out there, just like you, learning to stand tall again after years of bowing low. People rediscovering their voices, their courage, their joy, not through defiance, but through grace. People who are healing, not because they were broken, but because they've carried too much for too long. If you're one of them, if something in this message touched something deep inside you, I would love to hear from you. Has your relationship with your adult children changed over time? Have you found yourself apologizing for things that now seem unnecessary? What helped you stop? What are you still learning? If you feel safe to share, please do. I read every story, and when we speak our truth, no matter how quietly, someone else out there feels a little less alone. And if this video made you feel seen, if it gave you a breath of peace, or reminded you of your strength, I'd be honored to stay connected. You can click subscribe below, not because you owe me anything, but because I believe in creating a space where voices like yours are valued, lifted, and heard. This isn't just a channel. It's a gathering place for people who've lived, who've loved, who've endured, and who are ready to live fully and freely, perhaps for the first time in a very long time. So take this with you. Wherever you go today, you are not behind. You are not too much or not enough. You are not someone who needs to apologize for needing love, space, rest, truth, or joy. You are a soul with roots deeper than most people can see. And every time you choose to honor that without guilt, without fear, you become a light for others too. Stand in that light. Walk gently, but firmly. And remember, you don't need to explain who you are. You only need to live it. With all my heart, thank you for being here. Until next time, be kind to yourself. You are already enough.